Hello and welcome to Florida Watch. I'm your host, Doug Miles, and joining me on the panel today are Dennis Maley, the editor of the Bradenton Times, Cooper Levey-Baker, the editor of the Florida Independent, as well as former CBS White House Correspondent Gary Schuster. Our first topic today is Rick Scott's budget proposal and its possible implications. And earlier this week, gentlemen, he announced his budget over in Eustis, Florida. Cooper, I know you've been covering the story as well. He put it up online, and I know that site crashed for a while. Is his budget going to crash in Tallahassee?
It's a possibility, yeah. We were all looking forward to it, and immediately the budget went down. And I think that we talked a lot last week about what we were expecting, and I think the cuts that we're seeing are sort of along those lines of what we were thinking we were going to see. You see real cuts to education. Per pupil spending is going to be down about 10% should these cuts pass. You also see cuts to programs that cover the medically needy. You see cuts to other health and human services programs that are out there. And I think that, it's no surprise that Democrats are upset about these cuts. They're going to decry education and health care cuts all day. But what I was really struck with was how quickly the Republicans came out and were vehemently opposed to many of the measures. Maybe not the overall budget itself, but they were all picking it apart individually. And so you have an education subcommittee that was saying a 10% cut is simply unreliable and telling Scott's advisors to go back and redo their math. And you also have, I think, a really interesting cuts that are being made in the Department of Corrections. There are some massive cuts that are going on there, as well as some efforts to privatize prisons. And some of the law and order folks, the Republicans in the state legislature, were really up in arms about that. State Senator Mike Fasano from Newport Richey, he was really outraged about funding cuts to this program that will eliminate a database that's supposed to help monitor prescription drug abusers. And so I think that it was amazing to me how quickly those tensions rose to the surface and how quickly you saw state legislators try to distance themselves from Scott's ideas and really call for them to go back and rework some of their assumptions.
Yeah, I think people have been waiting for this. I mean, they've been sort of making notes and taking their toll on exactly what's going to be in this budget. And I think they were surprised by it in some ways because it's been leaked here and there, but in some ways they didn't know how bad it was going to be. For example, in Sarasota and Manatee counties, it's going to be $20 million in Manatee, $17 million in Sarasota County just for the cuts. Well, nobody sort of had that yet, and it's not specific yet, but it gives people an idea. And I think all these different areas, whether it's corrections, whether it's highways, whether it's schools, no matter what it is, we're all laying in the weeds waiting for him to come out. And that's why he went to Eustis, because he wanted that Tea Party backing over there so we'd have some support, because if he went anyplace else, it wouldn't have been as friendly, a welcome, except for the people who were chanting him on during the election, who wanted to see these tax cuts and spending cuts and those kind of things. And so he went to them, didn't stay long, as you said, and then came back to Tallahassee and did a rerun on it. But he went to Eustis, and there was a reason for that.
I think also, too, the interesting thing I saw was Tea Party groups were mad because the cuts were not deep enough. He's had some meetings since then where they've been criticizing it, saying that it doesn't go far enough.
Absolutely, and the same thing's happening in Washington.
Yeah.
The same exact thing is happening in Washington.
Gary, I think you bring up an interesting point with going over to Eustis and selling it to the Tea Party. And one of the interesting dynamics that brought forth, we had talked earlier about how he would get along with the Republican-dominated legislature and the potential ramifications of Senator Haradopoulos wanting to run for the Senate seat. But one of the things I did see was Haradopoulos' response. He kind of had the kid gloves on. And I think that the message of going to Eustis in one regard was, be careful. And I think Haradopoulos' response says to me that I can't make that crowd too angry, even though I've got control in Tallahassee. If I want their support in the primary, which they're going to be a very big factor in, absolutely, I better be real careful how I respond to that. So that was one of the interesting things I saw.
And you're going to see this game playing continue starting next month when the legislature convenes. You're going to see even more of it. It'll get louder. It'll get wider spread. It'll be on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side. And it'll be interesting to see how the governor and his people game this plan of theirs to get this thing
That could
passed.
be their best weapon. Hey, we could hurt you guys in the primary next time around.
And also, too, Scott's appeal so far to the state legislature has not been very sort of complex. He had some lawmakers over to his house for dinner, I think the night it came out, and his message, according to the news reports, was simply, just pass it. So, I mean, we'll see kind of whether that sort of blunt appeal is going to work. I'm not sure.
Well, he's obviously a businessman, entrepreneur type, but he's going to realize quickly entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily work in government, does it?
Exactly, yeah.
You have to get consensus. You can't tell somebody, pass something and get it done, right?
Yeah, and I think this battle between Herodopoulos and Scott is going to be really fascinating to see unfold. You know, Herodopoulos is really making some major efforts to inject himself into debates that really have nothing to do with Florida, and so you see him commenting about a really wide range of issues that are sort of positioning himself for his Senate run. Just the other day, I think he raised $1 million in one single fundraiser in one day. So it shows you the kind of pull that he has with special interest business groups in Florida. And so how that shakes out, I think, is going to be just fascinating to watch.
It's going to be fun to see because Scott doesn't have to rely on, as Chris did, the state plane to get in places and have stories written about how much he's using it and how much it costs the taxpayers and everybody throwing rocks and stones at him about it. He just gets in his plane and flies someplace, and he's already done it.
I talked to some members of the House this week, and a couple interesting dynamics they pointed out was, one, you have a very big shift from the old scenario where you had Government Chris who would promise everybody the world when he rolled out his budget, and then they had to come back and say you're not getting it. And now you have the opposite where he comes forward and says you're not getting anything, and they have to try to peel it forward. But members of the House did tell me that they're looking for Dean Cannon to step up and kind of fill that void, and they think the House is going to play more of the political aspect in that regard because they're looking for Herodopoulos to kind of back off on some of those things, and that's something a lot of people weren't prepared for.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a real interesting session. This thing starting in a couple of weeks.
One of the biggest things you brought up, Cooper, is the education cuts, and of course locally down here, just they've been cutting so much over the years, and arts programs, music, that kind of thing. How is this going to affect local schools in these counties? And I know a lot of that money is federal money, though, right? That's not going to be coming down.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting twist. They're actually telling them that sort of they can cover some of these cuts for the first year by using some stored up federal money that they received, which is kind of ironic considering Scott's very vocal opposition to receiving any sort of money from the federal government. In fact, they turned down some more this week. As far as it plays out for a local school, I think it's almost tough to know. And I think the other thing that we're seeing looking at the state legislature's reaction is there's a real desire on their part for specifics, and they have not gotten them yet. For example, I mean, you have members of the healthcare committee there who doesn't know, looking at the budget, simply which programs are getting cut, because there's so much reshuffling and so much reorganization going on. You don't know if it's being cut overall or just being shifted to another department. And so a lot of people in the state legislature, I don't even think really know exactly kind of what the makeup of some of these cuts are going to look like.
You know, and the other thing, and I've seen a couple things done on this, but when Scott came out and said there's going to like $4.1 billion in cuts, if you do the math,
it doesn't add up very well.
And divide it, no, it doesn't add up very well. And in one place, it got a barely true evaluation because everybody thinks because they're going to get tax cuts and spending cuts that this is going to really do well. Well, the average household, if you believe a couple of these things that have been done, is $137 for a year. Is the average household is going to get in relief. That's not a week at the grocery store. It's not. I don't think it's what people were looking for.
A lot of experts are looking at this and saying that the reorganization, the things that are supposed to save money, even the House studies on how much money is going to be saved is coming up sometimes a third of what Scott's staff is trying to report. But what a lot of people are calling this is a stealth deregulation. We're trying to go under the guise of we're going to save money, but really what we're going to do is just deregulate every industry that we can and try to privatize as much as possible. And it's old supply side economics, and the trickle down theory.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not trickling down.
Well, I've always found this interesting. Look up trickle in the dictionary.
Right.
It doesn't problem very much, does it?
You can barely find it.
Yeah, I mean, I think also another part of this is, I mean, you see a real assault on sort of the safety net. And one thing that has been a big issue this week is the debate over unemployment benefits for typical Floridians. And they're really using, I think, some too optimistic projections for what some of these cuts are going to do to justify their actions. They're slashing benefits that Floridians will receive from the unemployment program in the promise that companies will then create jobs who can then hire more unemployed people. And when you look at the cost that the unemployment benefits that the businesses are paying into this, it's minimal. It's sort of, you're not going to be able to create many positions saving $200 a month per employee. So it's, I think you see this real assault on what is left of the safety net.
This sort of reminds me of when Reagan was running in 1979 and 80, and George Bush was his opponent at the time, along with a bunch of others early on. And Reagan was talking about tax cuts and spending cuts and going back to this, and Bush called it voodoo economics. And I'm surprised nobody has said that here yet.
I was talking to an economist about this week, and he said, what we're seeing here, and he brought up the exact same example. He said, we're seeing that exact same supply side. In 2003, the Wall Street Journal said supply side economics have died in a whimper, and they were some of the biggest advocates for it. Again, it's that just what you said, that theory that if we keep deregulating, if we keep cutting taxes, it'll eventually create growth. We've seen that doesn't happen, and we're talking about a state that's already as business friendly as you can get. So the idea that by making it more so, you're going to have a big shift, I don't see it.
I don't either.
Let me throw this out. Social services. I checked some of the items in the budget. A lot of that is going to be cut. I know you talked about President Bush before, but number one, about 1,000 points of light, remember, making charities more involved in that. Is that something that Governor Scott's going to have to emphasize? Maybe churches, local organizations that can kind of take up the slack of state social services? That's a huge part of the budget.
I mean, I think they'll have to. I don't think there is another plan out there. And if you ask, sort of what's going to happen to some of these people who are going to, say, for example, have their Medicaid benefits cut or get kicked off a medically needy program, the answer is private charity is going to have to step up. And there really is no alternative. So I don't see how else he can sell it except for appealing to that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And also the corporate income tax proposed being cut, which was supposed to generate new jobs. Is that going to really be effective?
Well, the business lobby likes it. I mean, they're up there talking about how much they like it. And indeed, about half of that 4.1 is corporate business cuts. But exactly what they are and how it works, I don't think they know. They're just sort of cheering from the sideline. But I don't think they exactly know what they're cheering for yet. So the score is 0-0 right now, But I mean, once the score gets up there a little bit and it's, tipping one side or the other, and they're getting hurt maybe because of the pushback from the Dems or the other Republicans, the more moderate Republicans who don't want it.
Right.
I mean, there's so many things that are going to happen in this next 3 weeks, or the next 3 weeks when they get going on this in March, that we'll have a lot of fodder to talk about it, because it'll be different. It'll be different, I guarantee you, every week.
Let's kind of go around the table. How much of a fight do you think Scott's going to have? A big one, or will most of it be passed? What do you think, Dennis?
I think that I don't think a lot of it will pass. I think there will be a lot of things where the Republicans have that power to do it. But what I'm going to look for is going to be that dynamic with his Tea Party and people like Herodopoulos who might go along to get along. The opposite of what we thought. We thought Rick Scott was going to be in that position, but now this brings something interesting into it. And I'm going to look for maybe that dynamic to shift a little bit this week after what I saw.
Cooper?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see really vigorous debate over some of the individual programs, the programs that the Republican legislature has created and are supportive of and want to see continue. And they understand the reasons why that. But I think overall, I mean, the cuts, it seems likely that spending is certainly going to get cut this year. I think the other question, going back to what Gary was saying, is this question of tax cuts. The Cannon and Herodopoulos have both been sort of wishy-washy about how strongly they're going to support tax cuts. I think they both would like to have the tax cuts stay, but I don't know if they can make the math work. And so I think that's going to become a really pointed issue too.
Yeah, I think, Doug, that you're going to see some coalitions that involve local governments who are really getting gored in some of these cut proposals. You're going to see a lot more activity from the local counties and cities in Tallahassee before more than they have before. I think you're going to see a lot of county commissioners, mayors, school superintendents treading up to Tallahassee, pleading their cases, maybe as a group. Maybe there'll be a superintendent's group. There could be a mayor's. You don't know what's going to happen here, but I think when the ox starts getting gored, you get people there who want to make sure that it isn't theirs all.
Yeah, you read my mind on that. I get a chance to cover some of those county meetings.
Yeah, I know.
We're already
you do,
talking
sure.
about putting a coalition, I believe, in March or April to go to Washington first, but I know they're going to be going to Tallahassee as well, and they're already fighting for programs that are probably going to be cut anyway. Locally.
And remember that most of those governments are dominated by the GOP in the state. Also, does that further splinter the party?
Sure. No, this is almost like a Broadway show. You know, it's on the road, right? And they'll try it out a couple places.
Right now.
Right, they'll try it out a couple places, and then the next thing you know, they're all in Washington. They're at the National Governors Conference, and I mean, this is going to be an effort, I think, over a long period of time.
But it won't close on opening night.
Well, there are those who don't want it to, that's for sure.
Well, speaking of budgets, and the Congressional Budget Office has projected a $1.5 trillion deficit in 2011. That's nearly 10% of GDP. And Dennis, I know you've written extensively about this in the last couple of weeks. Social Security is going to be affected heavily on that, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. It's going to be a big part of the debate. You have a situation where you're going into the massive trust fund that it already has. So it's not running in the red in that sense. It's using its plan for reserves right now about 5 years earlier than they thought it would. And that's only expected to be for about 2 of those 5 years because of the downturn. But what you're going to see right now is this being used as a political football. You're going to see people choosing sides, and you're going to see people making this an issue much bigger than it is because there are a lot of people that don't like these kind of social programs. And this is every time there's an opportunity to kind of starve the beast, it's taken.
I agree. I mean, it certainly is going to become a talking point that you're going to hear. The question, of course, Social Security has always been regarded as something that a politician can't touch without sort of getting electrocuted. I'm curious if, that is still the case, or if you do have such this sentiment against public benefits that sort of they might be able to carry the day a little bit. I think long term, I don't know if the mentality of the American people has changed that much. I mean, Social Security is such a popular program, but, are they going to make some hay about it in the next couple of years and probably get some points out of it? I'm not sure. I think so.
I think somebody's going to have to do something about it, but as we talked last week, nobody seems to want to touch it. And so they had the special commission. The special commission came, worked, reported, nothing. Nothing happens. And that's sort of the way it is. Something's going to happen to this because in, 2043, they can't keep paying, right? And then they have to...
It can pay full benefit up to 2037.
Right.
It can pay 75% of the benefit for 75 years.
Yeah.
In fact, to be frank with you, there's never been such a big cushion in Social Security that it could pay that many benefits for that long. There's a problem long term where you have to make some adjustments, but I will tell you, the opponents are winning the war of popular opinion right now because as I study this and talk to more people, I hear those talking points that are mythological coming back at me. So a lot of people are starting to accept the idea, and my prediction is going to be the American people are going to swallow the sale of let's raise the minimum age and let's lower your benefit. And that's not the thing that needs to happen if you look at the facts, but that's what I think is going to be sold.
I think you're going to have another element, though, too, Dennis, and that is you can raise the age, lower the benefit, but they're going to have to increase the amount of money that's being taxed. I just think, what is it, $108,000,
$106,800.
Yeah. And the CEO who makes $500,000 a year is paying the same thing somebody who makes 106 is. I don't think that can stand.
Well, if you remove that cap, the whole problem goes away. You don't have to increase the age or increase the benefit.
Exactly, but I think that's what's going to happen. I think that cap's going to have to come off. You can take, we all know that people are living longer, but it's not that much longer than it was when this thing came into existence back in the 30s. 4 years, or 4 years and 3 months or something is the average life expectancy now, longer than it was then. So it's not that big a deal to do that, but I think the cap, the money, is going to be important. It isn't right now because wages are down, people are unemployed, they're not getting the revenue that they want. But I think once this sort of straightens out, you're going to see some attention given to that cap.
I know to all due respect to you, Gary, we kind of span different age groups here, but as someone, I know you and I have had this conversation in the office, Dennis.
I'm not going to hold it against you being young.
You look younger than me anyway.
I'm not going to hold it against you being young and inexperienced.
Thank you, Ronald Reagan. But, I don't say I'm not going to get it, but I'm not expecting it. And I think a lot of people in my age group feel that way. Cooper, you're a little bit younger than me. What do people your age tell you?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't have too many conversations with people in my age group about Social Security.
You will.
I'm sure it'll come. I mean, I think that me personally, I believe that sort of what you've seen over the last, 4 or 5 decades in America is really a concentrated movement of wealth from the working and middle classes into the upper reaches. And Social Security, I think, is one of the last bastions of that those funds that go towards to help those classes. And so I think that long term, I mean, we can talk about the short-term politics of this and sort of keeping it solvent for the short term, but I think long term, definitely the anti-tax conservatives, I mean, have it in their mind to get rid of the program entirely. And the way things have gone over the past few decades, I'm not optimistic about the program's survival. No. So me personally, I do not expect it to exist when I retire. Maybe that's just sort of my pessimism and my reading of the situation right now. I mean, it could easily change, but I'm not looking forward to it now.
Do you think that's a fallacy? I mean, I know we've talked about this.
I think it's completely unnecessary, but unfortunately, I agree with Gary 100%. You scrap the cap and the problem goes away, but I just hear so little conversation about that and so much about raising the benefit. The things to look at is, first of all, how many people now have defined benefit pensions that subsidize a little bit? If you look at the average Florida State retiree, they get $1,600 a month from their pension. And then on average, a person receiving Social Security gets $1,100. That's a very modest retirement. How many people in my generation are going to get defined benefit pensions? Almost none of them. Coopers, they're not even going to know what you're talking about, okay? So when you look at that and you say, well, right now at my age, for the full benefit, I've got to wait till 70. How many jobs, how many cubicles, how many offices, how many manual laborers are they letting you hang around till 70? That's going to put us all in Publix, greeters at Costco and Walmart. I sincerely hope that's not the case, but...
Yeah. One of the things, Doug, I think about this is that it's going to have to be the last year. If Obama gets reelected, you may not see this surface and pass until the last year of his administration, so he doesn't have to face it as a reelection bid. But all the people who vote for it are going to have to. Mm-hmm. The congressmen and the senators, if they have to move this through. It took a real special set of circumstances the last time this was changed, the age changes were done, and it's going to take that same thing now. It's going to be something real special to be worked out to get this thing done.
Yeah, I just think most people in our age group probably think, well, if they get it, great, but they're not expecting it. Like you said, there's no defined pension anymore. You have to do your own 401k or IRA or something like that. So it's up to you now to be more entrepreneurial for your retirement, right?
Yeah. Good luck. Good luck. Yeah, good.
Why are we in this business then? Gentlemen, we have a few minutes left in the show. Let's try to go around the table right now and ask any topic you'd like to bring up. Gary, why don't we start with you?
I want to talk about Egypt. Mubarak, we're right on the cusp of a lot of things happening in Egypt and in the Middle East. Egypt is one end. If you look at the Middle East as a big tent, Egypt is one pole, Saudi Arabia is the other pole. Egypt is collapsing. I don't know that there'll be free and fair elections as the protesters want, but Mubarak has resigned as we know it. He was supposed to do it earlier, but supposedly he's done. He's out. He left Cairo. And there is movement afoot to probably put the military in gradually to run things until they get something. But I would look for other things to happen. Bahrain has a big protest rally scheduled for this weekend. Syria hasn't been heard from yet. There are others. This reminds me of Iran in 1979 when the Shah fell.
Similar situation. He had to escape. Came to America at that time, didn't he?
I've seen the movie.
Optimistic, Gary, about it, or?
Over time, yes, but there's going to be trial and error. There's going to be a lot of coalitions till they finally get the one, because you got the Muslim Brotherhood. You have so many factions in there. I was in Egypt 2 years ago, standing on the steps of the National Museum where this thing is taking place now. And there are so many people, 20 million people in this town, and there are so many factions, it's worse than the Florida legislature.
Cooper?
The thing that we're looking at, I think, this week at the Florida Independent is we're hoping to see some action around a program we've been writing about a lot, which provides HIV/AIDS drugs to low-income patients in Florida. And we've been doing a lot of writing about this just because, we believe it's a really vital issue for thousands of Floridians. And they just narrowly averted sort of a funding gap that would have left patients without their drugs for 2 months. So they've kind of solved it through April, waiting on new federal funds to come down. But without new action from the state legislature, without new action from Congress, the program is not going to work, and we're just going to have the same problem year after year. So we're really looking to see some action on that program, and we're trying to delve into exactly kind of what caused the crisis in the first place and see what can be done about it. So that's an issue that we are really focused on over the coming week.
How much do you think corporations should give back as far as the drug companies go? I know you see some of these ads now where they say if you cannot afford a medication, call this number and maybe they can work it out with you. Is that going to have to be a bigger part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how they sort of narrowly averted this sort of funding gap, which is they contracted with this group called Well Vista, which is a nonprofit that's organized by a lot of the pharmaceutical companies. But still, I mean, the states are paying these pharmaceutical companies to provide these low-income drugs. Now, they get a discounted rate, but I'm sure that the pharmaceutical companies could be doing more to offer states a discount. I mean, these are really, we're talking about 10,000 patients right now in Florida. These are people who are below the federal poverty line, who have to pay for these really expensive drugs to survive. So I think that there's certainly, it's not a huge group of people, and certainly the pharmaceutical companies can and should do more.
Dennis, what's on your mind?
I think you're going to see some very creative uses of Photoshop in an effort to get pictures of Rick Scott on Facebook or on Craigslist shirtless, because it seems like the only way to get a Republican incumbent out right now in today's environment.
Is that the quickest resignation you've ever seen? 3 hours. I mean, there has to be more to that story, don't you think?
Oh, sure.
Well, there were so many more flagrant examples of
Talk
misbehavior.
about the congressman up in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never seen it. Usually they deny it for a month or two.
He had the picture.
He
But
started,
it's only a picture.
He started with a denial
Yeah, he did.
for about
11 seconds?
Yeah, it wasn't long. It was less than an hour.
Wasn't me.
It wasn't. It was less than an hour, and then he
It
was
was
back.
until his wife called, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's how long it took, and then he finally, somebody either told him or he realized, I'm cooked.
How can it be brought down by a site called Gawker.com? That's embarrassing.
Power of the
Hey, you know what?
First.
You know what? There are lots of sites out there that surprise that exist. I mean, there's one for tracking plagiarism. There's one for track. I mean, there's everything. So.
But should he be surprised? Does he get the Darwin Award? I mean, come on. You're a congressman and you put...
Yeah, oh, well.
I don't know if he thought he was going to get away with it by calling himself a lobbyist.
Well, gentlemen, that's going to wrap it up for this week. I'd like to thank our panel and also thank you for joining us here on Florida Watch. You can watch it each week here at METV or for free anytime at the BradentonTimes.com. Until next week, I'm Doug Miles for Dennis Maley, Gary Schuster, and Cooper Levey-Baker. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again real soon.